Choosing a Linux distribution can feel overwhelming, especially if you're new to the world of open source operating systems. You've probably heard people say, just install Linux, as if Linux is one single thing. But the moment you start researching, you realize there isn't just one Linux. There are hundreds of distributions, often called distros, each with its own philosophy, design choices, software management system, community culture, and target audience. For a beginner, this abundance of choice can be confusing rather than empowering. So the real question becomes, which Linux distro should you choose? And how do you make that decision without feeling lost? First, it's important to understand what a Linux distro actually is. At its core, Linux is the kernel, the central component that communicates between hardware and software. But a usable operating system requires much more than a kernel. It needs a desktop environment, system utilities, package management tools, default applications, and configuration choices. Different groups build these components together in different ways, creating distributions tailored to specific needs. Some distros focus on stability, others on cutting-edge features. Some are beginner-friendly with polished interfaces, while others prioritize minimalism and control. When you're choosing a distro as a beginner, there are several key factors to consider. Ease of installation is one of the first. If the installation process is complicated, it can discourage new users immediately. Hardware compatibility is another. Not every distribution handles drivers and firmware in the same way, especially for Wi-Fi cards, graphics cards, and printers. Stability matters as well. Some distros prioritize rock-solid reliability over having the latest software versions. Community support is crucial too. A strong community means tutorials, forums, documentation, and quick answers when you encounter problems. Finally, consider the user experience. The desktop layout, default apps, update process, and general feel of the system all contribute to whether you'll enjoy using it daily. Let's start with Linux Mint, one of the most recommended distros for beginners. Linux Mint is built on Ubuntu, which itself is based on Debian, but Mint adds its own layer of polish and user-friendliness. One of the reasons Mint is so popular is that it feels familiar to Windows users. The default Cinnamon desktop environment includes a bottom panel, a start menu-like launcher, system tray icons, and straightforward settings menus. For someone coming from Windows 7 or Windows 10, Mint feels comfortable right away. You don't have to relearn basic navigation patterns. Mint also includes many essential applications out of the box. You get a web browser, media player, Office suite, and system tools without needing to install much manually. The update manager is simple and transparent, giving users control over what updates are installed. Mint prioritizes stability, which means it doesn't push the newest experimental features at the cost of reliability. For beginners who want something that just works, Mint is often the safest starting point. The community is large, documentation is clear, and troubleshooting guides are widely available. However, Mint's conservative approach also means it's not always the most cutting-edge option. If you want the absolute latest software versions or experimental desktop features, you might find Mint slightly behind. But for most new users, that trade-off is actually a benefit rather than a drawback. Next is Zorin OS, another beginner-friendly distro that focuses heavily on design and user transition. Zorin is based on Ubuntu as well, but its identity revolves around making Linux accessible and visually appealing. One of its standout features is the ability to switch desktop layouts to mimic Windows or Mac OS. This can be incredibly comforting for users who fear drastic change. Zorin tries to remove the intimidation factor by offering a polished, modern interface that feels premium. Zorin OS often includes proprietary drivers more seamlessly, making hardware setup easier for some users. It also provides a curated selection of software and a streamlined settings panel that simplifies customization. For beginners who value aesthetics and ease of use, Zorin can feel like a very welcoming entry point into Linux. However, Zorin has a Core edition that's free and an M Pro edition that costs money. While the free version is perfectly usable, some users feel uncomfortable paying for a Linux distro when so many alternatives are free. That said, the paid version mainly supports development and provides extra themes and software, not essential functionality. Ubuntu is arguably the most well-known Linux distribution. It has been around for many years and has become almost synonymous. Desktop Linux, Ubuntu focuses on balancing usability and innovation. It uses the GNOME desktop environment, which has a more modern, streamlined design compared to traditional desktop layouts. Instead of a start menu at the bottom, Ubuntu features a dock and an overview mode that emphasizes productivity and workspace organization. For beginners, Ubuntu's biggest strength is its ecosystem. It has massive community support, official documentation, countless tutorials, and strong corporate backing from Canonical, the company behind it. Most third-party Linux software is tested first on Ubuntu, meaning compatibility is rarely an issue. Hardware detection is generally good, and installation is straightforward. However, the GNOME desktop can feel unfamiliar to Windows users. It requires a small mindset shift. Some people love its clean, distraction-free design, while others prefer something more traditional. Ubuntu also uses snap packages for some applications, which can sometimes increase startup times and disk usage compared to traditional package formats. This isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but it's something to be aware of. Debian is the foundation of many other distributions, including Ubuntu and Mint. It is known for its stability and commitment to free software principles. Debian is incredibly robust and reliable, making it popular for servers. On the desktop, it can also be an excellent choice, but it may require slightly more setup than beginner-focused distros. Debian offers multiple desktop environments during installation, including GNOME, KDE, XFCE, and others. However, its default configuration may not include proprietary drivers automatically, which can complicate Wi-Fi setup for some users. The trade-off is that Debian is extremely stable. Software in Debian's stable branch is thoroughly tested before release, which reduces the likelihood of bugs. For a beginner who wants a system that rarely breaks and doesn't mind doing a bit of extra configuration, Debian can be a rewarding choice. But if you want the smoothest, most guided experience from the start, Ubuntu or Mint might feel easier. MX Linux is less mainstream, but highly respected in the Linux community. It is based on Debian stable and focuses on performance, simplicity, and efficiency. MX Linux is particularly attractive for users with older hardware because it runs well on lower source machines. It often uses the XFCE desktop environment, which is lightweight yet customizable. One of MX Linux's strengths is its suite of custom tools that simplify system management. It includes graphical utilities for tasks that might otherwise require terminal commands. This balance between power and accessibility makes it surprisingly beginner-friendly. Though it doesn't market itself as aggressively as Mint or Ubuntu, the interface of MX Linux is functional rather than flashy. It may not look as modern out of the box as Zorin or Ubuntu, but it is fast and dependable. For users reviving older laptops or seeking efficiency, MX Linux is worth serious consideration. Pup_OS is developed by System76, a company that sells Linux-based computers. Pup_OS is built on Ubuntu, but includes its own customizations and enhancements. It is particularly popular among developers, engineers, and users who work with graphics-intensive applications. One of its standout features is excellent support for NVIDIA GPUs, which can be a major advantage for gamers or machine learning enthusiasts. Pup_OS uses a modified GNOME desktop with added productivity features such as automatic window tiling. This allows users to manage multiple windows efficiently without manual resizing. For someone who multitasks heavily, this can be transformative. While Pup_OS is beginner-friendly in many ways, its workflow may feel slightly different compared to traditional Windows-style desktops. However, its polished design, performance optimizations, and hardware support make it a strong contender for users who want both ease of use and advanced capabilities. When comparing all these distros, it helps to think about your specific goals. If you're switching from Windows and want something familiar and low-risk, Linux Mint is often the safest recommendation. If you care about modern aesthetics and smooth transitions, Zorin OS may appeal more. If you want the most widely supported and documented option, Ubuntu stands out. If you value long-term stability and don't mind minor setup tasks, Debian is a solid foundation. If you're working with older hardware, MX Linux offers impressive performance. If you're a developer, gamer, or power user who wants cutting-edge hardware support, Pup_OS is worth exploring. Another key consideration is desktop environment preference. Cinnamon, GNOME, XFCE, and others each provide different experiences. Cinnamon feels traditional, GNOME feels modern and minimal. XFCE feels lightweight and efficient. Your comfort with the desktop layout can significantly influence your satisfaction with a distro. Updates are also important to understand. Some distros follow fixed release cycles, where major upgrades happen every few years with long-term support. Others have shorter cycles with more frequent updates. Beginners often benefit from long-term support releases because they prioritize stability and security without frequent disruptive changes. Community culture matters more than people realize. When you encounter issues, the quality of available answers can shape your experience. Ubuntu and Mint have massive user bases, which means quick solutions. Debian. Documentation is thorough, but sometimes assumes more technical familiarity. MX Linux has an active but smaller community. Pop_OS has strong support channels, especially for users with System76 hardware. Ultimately, the best Linux distro is the one that fits your needs and makes you comfortable using your computer daily. There is no universal best. Linux's strength lies in its diversity. Beginners sometimes worry about choosing the wrong distro, but the reality is that switching between distros is always possible. The skills you learn on one will transfer to others. The most important step is simply starting. Install one in a virtual machine or on a spare computer. Explore it. Use it for a week. Notice how it feels. Linux is not just about performance metrics or package formats. It's about how you interact with your system, how much control you want, and how much you enjoy the experience. Choosing your first Linux distro is less about perfection and more about alignment. Do you value familiarity? Choose Mint or Zorin. Do you value community size and compatibility? Choose Ubuntu. Do you value stability above all? Choose Debian. Do you value performance on older machines? Choose MX Linux. Do you value productivity and hardware optimization? Choose Pop_OS. In the end, the right distro is the one that keeps you curious rather than frustrated, empowered rather than confused. Linux is a journey, not a single decision. And whichever path you take, you're stepping into a world built on collaboration, transparency, and freedom. A world where your computer truly feels like yours.